There are moments when disrespect arrives dressed in evening wear, when oppression takes the stage for applause, and when privilege views humiliation as entertainment, and the consequences as someone else's problem. For Dr. Simone Rivers, that moment came at 7:15 p.m. on a Saturday evening in the Grand Meridian Ballroom. A 20-year-old man named Graham Wexley decided it would be funny to throw cake in her face, and his family joined in. But they didn't know who they were humiliating. And when the truth came out, they would realize they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. But it would be too late, and they didn't know that their $700 million dreams would vanish with a single word from her. Dr. Simone Rivers stood at the entrance to the ballroom. She took in the glimmer of the crystal chandeliers hanging from the Renaissance-style frescoed ceiling, the sea of designer gowns and jewel tones, and the camera flashes popping like small explosions. She adjusted the sleeve of her deep blue evening gown, custom-made, elegant without being flashy, professional without being boring. "Do you remember the ethics clause in Section 8, Article 3? Naomi Pierce whispered beside her, dressed in a chic, charcoal gray outfit accented with silver accessories that reflected the light. "You were right to insist on that," she said. "I'm always right," Simone replied quietly, with a smile ready for the camera, but her eyes scanned the room with the sensitivity of someone who had navigated environments where being underestimated was a tactical advantage for decades. $700 million. That was the paper value of tonight's partnership announcement. More importantly, for communities that had been receiving nothing but empty promises wrapped in press releases, real jobs with benefits and career advancement, communities that continued to receive nothing but empty promises wrapped in press releases. Rivers Access Technologies had specialized in workforce development through technology internships, and this agreement with Wexley Capital would expand its operations across 8 states. But standing in this ballroom filled with old money and even older mindsets, Simone felt the familiar pressure of a performance expectation crumbling, not a performance of competence. She had proven that thousands of times through patents and profit margins, a performance of belonging, of making her own presence feel comfortable in spaces designed to exclude powerful people, people who looked like her. "Dr. Rivers," said Tilden Wexley, striding toward them in his impeccably tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the financial titan, his voice echoing off the marble floor. His wife Maribel glided beside him, adorned with enough diamonds to fund a small university endowment. "I'm so glad you were able to join us tonight," he said. "The pleasure is mine," Simone replied gently, extending her hand for a professional handshake. Tilden held her hand for a moment, as if touching her required a generous effort on his part. "Oh dear," said Maribel, touching Simone's arm with her manicured fingers, a bright but hollow smile on her face. "Would you mind going to the kitchen to check on the sparkling apple cider service? It looks like there's not much left at table 6, she asked. Simone's smile didn't falter, but she sensed Naomi, standing beside her, stiffen. "Actually, I'm here as your partner tonight, Ms. Wexley. But I'm sure the event staff would be happy to assist with the beverage service." Maribel's laughter rang out like the expensive ice cubes in a crystal glass. "It's entirely my fault. Still, while you're here, could you check if Dr. Rivers is supposed to be at the head table? I didn't quite understand the seating arrangement." "I'm Dr. Rivers," Simone said gently, noticing that no sign of recognition had appeared on Maribel's carefully guarded face. "And yes, I'll be at the head table for the partnership announcement." Naomi interjected with professional tact. "Perhaps we should head to the seats assigned to us? I think the program is about to begin." A look crossed Tilden's face that, had it been real, might have been interpreted as embarrassment. Of course. But I'd appreciate it if you could confirm with security that the guest list has been verified, just a matter of procedure, you know." "I believe that's Brandon's responsibility," Simone replied, naming the event coordinator. "Shall we proceed? I'm eagerly awaiting the presentation on our collaboration." They moved through the crowd like a current flowing through calm waters, leaving behind waves of people turning their heads and whispering. The ballroom was a masterpiece of the old money's aesthetic. Gold leaf on the crown moldings, antique mirrors reflecting light with geometric patterns, table settings likely more expensive than some families' monthly grocery bills. In the center, on a raised stage, there was a row of chairs for the key participants in tonight's announcement. Simone approached the seat clearly marked with a gold plaque reading, "Rivers Access Technologies, Dr. Simone Rivers, CEO." A hostess in a neat black outfit lunged forward, extending her hand as if to physically block Simone's path. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," the woman said, with a rehearsed air of concern that betrayed no actual regret. "There must be a mix-up. The shared seats are reserved for this person." Naomi deftly pulled the printed seating chart from her handbag. Her smile was professional, but her eyes were warning. "Dr. Rivers is exactly where he's supposed to be. Perhaps you'd like to double-check your documents before causing any further confusion." Laughter rose from the surrounding tables. It wasn't warm, it didn't mean welcome, but it was measuring, as if testing whether this moment would be the one where the stranger accepted her place, or where an incident might arise that could later be used as a weapon. Simone, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, sat down in her chair with practiced grace. Throughout her career she had found herself in rooms like this, where power disguised itself as politeness and oppression wore designer labels. She had learned at a young age that survival meant being twice as prepared, 3 times as professional, and never giving them the reaction they wanted. From a nearby table, Graham Wexley watched the exchange with the detached indifference of someone observing a performance staged for his amusement. He couldn't have been more than 20, yet his eyes held the relaxed confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no carry any lasting consequence. He studied Simone as if she were a puzzle he was considering whether to solve or simply dismantle. The first course arrived, a delicate dish containing microgreens and gold leaf, likely costing $50 per plate. Simone ate carefully, maintaining a light conversation while observing the subtle choreography in the room. The waitstaff moved within familiar routines. Photographers roamed strategically, aiming their cameras not at the entire room but at those in power. Everything felt choreographed, orchestrated, designed to perpetuate specific narratives about who belonged and who was merely a guest. "Your work in technology education is fascinating," said the woman to Simone's left, jotting down Simone's name along with hundreds of other names. "A board member of a foundation. It's almost like a charity program, isn't it? Very generous." "Actually, it's a profit center," Simone said gently, her tone not defensive but educational. 93% of our apprenticeship programs have a job placement rate and generate significant returns through innovation and talent retention. The participants we train create measurable value for our partner companies." "How resourceful," the woman replied, her tone implying that resourcefulness was some sort of contagious disease from lower-class neighborhoods. As dinner progressed, the pattern became clear. Every conversation was a trap. Every comment was laced with innuendos designed to remind Simone that her presence here was tolerated, that her presence was temporary, and that a single misstep could validate the predetermined conclusions about who deserved these spaces. Simone navigated every dialogue with the sensitivity of someone who had dedicated decades to documenting microaggressions for future use. She smiled when expected, laughed at the appropriate moments, and while maintaining the display of belonging these spaces demanded, kept a mental catalog of every small insult within the emerging patterns. Finally, dessert service began. The carts rolled into the ballroom, their silver domes gleaming beneath the candelabras, shimmering like small monuments to excess. Maribel Wexley gave a subtle signal, and a photographer approached the head table, adjusting his lens with a carefully cultivated ease that suggested he had been placed there specifically for this moment. Graham Wexley rose from his seat, holding a mocktail glass, sparkling apple cider, in a crystal glass that looked expensive enough to justify the pretense of sophistication. The room fell silent, filled with the anticipation of people who knew a show was about to begin and were eagerly waiting to see how it would unfold. "Friends, partners, distinguished guests," Graham began. In his voice was that peculiar blend of youth and absolute certainty, stemming from the fact that he never doubted his right to be listened to be important, and to be valued more than others. "To new ventures, new partnerships," and his eyes fixed on Simone with a predatory glee, "I'd like to raise a toast to new lessons on how things work in our world." The dessert cart stood beside the head table, positioned with the precision of a rehearsal. A waiter lifted the silver dome with a dramatic flourish, revealing a meticulously prepared chocolate cake. It was beautiful, expensive, and somehow menacing in its perfection. Graham set his glass down on the table and picked up a dessert fork, then deliberately set it aside and lifted a generous slice of cake with his bare hands. Cream smeared between his fingers, dark chocolate and white cream mingling into a chaotic mess, but he seemed to be enjoying it. "Dr. Rivers," he said, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent ballroom, "I think you should be the first to taste it. It's a special recipe." His smile was nothing but teeth. There was no warmth to it. It was meant to be impressive. Simone felt Naomi shift beside her. Her protective instincts had kicked in. But before either of them could react, D. Ransom, head of Wexley Security, appeared as if summoned. His imposing frame positioned itself strategically between Naomi and the unfolding situation. 2 more security guards approached. The lights flickering in their earpieces seemed aimed at isolating rather than protecting their positions. Cameras on phones rose up all around the room like a constellation of recording eyes. They weren't concerned witnesses, but eager spectators waiting for entertainment at others' expense. "Come on," Graham said, his smile sharpening as he approached Simone's chair. He entered Simone's personal space with practiced ease. "Don't be shy. We're all friends here, aren't we? We're all part of the same partnership." The words were spoken in a mocking tone. Simone maintained her professional composure, but her shoulders tensed because she knew what was coming. She had seen that look before. In boardrooms where men decided to push boundaries, at conferences where her expertise was questioned by people with half her qualifications, anywhere she feared someone might intimidate her and prove she didn't belong here. "You're very kind," she said in a calm voice. There was no trace of the tension building in her chest. "But perhaps we should wait for everyone to be served." Graham laughed. His voice was bright and ruthless, designed to invite the others to join in the joke at her expense. "Ah, Dr. Rivers. Always so proper. So professional." He took another step closer. The cake dripping from his hand fell onto the pristine white tablecloth. "But sometimes being proper doesn't matter. Sometimes what matters is understanding where you truly belong in our world." It all happened so fast. Graham's hand shot forward suddenly, and the cake struck Simone's face with a cold, wet blow. The cream hit her cheekbone, caught on her eyelashes, and dragged across her carefully applied makeup with a deliberate cruelty, as if wiping away dirt from a surface she found repulsive. Chocolate smeared across her dark skin, the white cream mixing with the brown, creating a mess that looked less like a simple prank and more like an act of humiliation. The blow wasn't hard enough to cause physical pain, but the intent was clear. This was not a playful gesture. This was not a spontaneous gesture. This was a message conveyed with cake instead of words. "You don't belong here. We can humiliate you without any consequences. Your presence is temporary, and we can revoke it whenever we want." Amid the crowd, sounds of astonishment spread like a breeze through tall grass. Then, starting from the Wexley table where Tilden and Maribel's Wexley table, laughter erupted. The parents, watching their son's cruelty as if it were a play worthy of applause, laughed brightly, approvingly, and with delight. Maribel actually clapped. Her diamond rings sparkled as her hands clapped. "Oh, Graham," the mother called out proudly. "You've always had such a sense of humor." Tilden raised his glass in a toast, smiling broadly. "Well done, my son. He's teaching proper respect." All around them, nervous laughter spread like a contagious disease. People who might have felt uncomfortable joining in the mockery had given themselves permission through the parents' approval. If the hosts found it amusing, if influential people endorsed this behavior, then of course laughing along was acceptable. "Look at this," Graham called out to the room, pointing at Simone with his cream-covered hand. "All that coy behavior, all that professionalism. Yet she can't even properly show gratitude for the opportunity we gave her." More laughter. More phones capturing the moment. More witnesses choosing the spectacle over intervention. Simone sat completely still. She didn't even blink. She didn't wipe the cake off. She didn't raise her voice, stand up, or offer any reaction they could use to justify what had just happened. She simply met Graham's gaze, took slow, controlled breaths, and let the cream run down her face while her mind calculated with crystal clarity. They thought this was strength. They thought humiliation was a leash. They believed the $700 million partnership value they thought it ensured they possessed Simone's dignity. They were unaware that their entire world was about to crumble, because none of them were aware of the ethical clause Naomi had mentioned. None of them had read the partnership agreement carefully enough to understand what the third paragraph of Article 8 meant, and none of them had realized that Dr. Simone Rivers had spent 30 years building a power that didn't require their permission, wasn't dependent on their approval, and couldn't be taken away with a pie thrown in her face. Simone's hands rested at her sides. Her breathing was steady. The expression on her face gave nothing away, and in the silence that followed Graham's performance, in that moment before the room moved on to the next entertainment, Simone spoke. A single word, clear and decisive. "Step back." The laughter died down. "I don't understand?" Tilden's smile was still in place, but a look of surprise was beginning to show in his eyes. Simone slowly stood up, cake still dripping from her face, and looked directly at him with a calmness that showed she held all the cards and was fully aware of it. "Rivers Access Technologies is withdrawing from the partnership immediately. The agreement is canceled." The ballroom fell completely silent. $700 million. Gone. The word withdrawal hung in the air like the moment after a lightning strike. The world held its breath, waiting for the thunderclap to confirm what had just happened. Tilden Wexley's smile had frozen on his face, but his eyes had sharpened with astonishment that was rapidly turning to anger. "Excuse me, did you say withdraw? Partnership agreements don't work that way, Dr. Rivers. We have contracts, legal obligations. You can't just—" "Article 8.3, Simone said in a calm voice, cake dripping from her face yet maintaining her dignity despite the cream in her hair. "The ethics clause your legal team approved 3 weeks ago. If one party engages in conduct that damages the partnership's reputation or exhibits values fundamentally at odds with the stated mission, the other party may terminate the contract immediately and without penalty." She gestured toward Graham, whose ruined suit cake smeared on his skin, and Graham, whose sly smile began to fade as he realized something had gone wrong. "Your son just attacked me in front of 300 witnesses, and you and your wife applauded. I believe this demonstrates values fundamentally incompatible with Rivers Access Technology's mission of dignity, respect, and equal opportunity. Naomi pulled out her phone and opened the contract efficiently, as if she'd anticipated this exact scenario. The clause is very clear, Mr. Wexley. Dr. Rivers has the right to terminate the contract immediately. All deposits must be returned to Rivers Access within 48 hours. All exclusivity agreements become void, and her smile was professional, but had a sharp edge. There is a provision for a $50 million indemnity to be paid to the terminating party once the cause is established. Cause? Maribel's voice had lost its melodic quality, taking on a sharp, harsh tone. This is nonsense. Graham was just having a little fun. Man, you know, you're not going to ruin a $700 million partnership over a harmless joke, are you? Simone finally reached up to wipe the cake off her face. The movement was deliberate and controlled. Miss Wexley, your 20-year-old son just threw cake in my face and called it a lesson to teach me my place. You laughed and called it humor. Your husband, meanwhile, raised a glass to teach me respect. She paused to let the words sink in, watching understanding dawn on the faces in the room. This is not a joke. This is an attack stemming from the belief that my presence here is temporary, that my dignity is negotiable, and that humiliating me is entertainment. She turned to address a wider audience. Her voice reached every corner of the ballroom, which had suddenly fallen silent. Rivers Access Technologies builds careers for people said to have no place in technology, finance, or rooms like this. We teach them that their talents matter more than their pasts, that their work speaks louder than assumptions about who they are. I cannot partner with people who believe that humiliation is acceptable as long as it targets the right victims. Everyone had a phone in their hand now, but the atmosphere had shifted. These weren't spectators who took pleasure in others' humiliation. They were witnesses documenting something entirely different. A woman refusing to accept disrespect, shifting power dynamics in real time, people facing consequences because they thought they were untouchable. Graham's smirk had completely vanished. Dad, she can't do that. We need this deal. Expansion depends on it. Shut up, Graham, Tilden snapped, his composure cracking. He turned to Simone with the forced logic typical of powerful men when their authority is challenged. Dr. Rivers, let's not rush this. Perhaps we can discuss this privately and find a solution that satisfies everyone. Graham will, of course, apologize. We could make a generous donation to a charity of your choice. There's certainly no need to throw months of work down the drain over a momentary mistake. A mistake, Simone repeated, leaving the phrase hanging in the air. An interesting description for an attack carried out intentionally in front of an audience. Security Chief D. Ransom stepped forward, adopting the cautious body language of someone trying to manage a situation that had spiraled out of control. Dr. Rivers, perhaps we should clear the room and discuss this calmly. There's nothing to discuss, Simone said firmly. The partnership is dissolved, effective immediately. Naomi, please send an official notice to the legal team. I want copies distributed within an hour. She began walking toward the exit, passing through the crowd parting before her as if she were emitting a force field. Naomi, phone in hand, typing messages quickly and carefully, came up beside her. You can't do this. Maribel's voice turned into a scream that shattered the composure she had so carefully maintained. Do you know who we are? Our connections? We'll destroy you. We guarantee you'll never work in this industry again. Simone stopped at the entrance to the ballroom and turned back one last time. Miss Wexley, I have 17 patents, a 93% internship placement rate, and partnerships with tech companies that value talent over family connections. You, on the other hand, have a son who finds this attack amusing and parents who encourage it. I'll be just fine. But your reputation. She glanced at the hundreds of phones still recording. Might need a little fixing. She walked out with her head held high, chaos spreading behind her like a forest fire. The lobby of the Grand Meridian was the exact opposite of the ballroom. Quieter, cooler, and less ostentatious. Simone headed straight for the restroom, while Naomi, following behind, began answering the flood of calls that had started pouring in. Inside the marble and gold-toned restroom, Simone could finally breathe. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. There was cake in her hair, a cream stain on her cheek, and her expensive dress was ruined. She looked like a victim, but she didn't feel that way. $700 million, Naomi said quietly, setting her phone down on the counter. You just walked away from $700 million. No, Simone corrected, wetting paper towels to clean her face. I just walked away from partners who thought my honor was negotiable. There's a difference. Her phone vibrated. Then it vibrated again. Soon, as the news began to spread faster than official statements, the phone started ringing constantly. Naomi picked up the phone and scanned the calls with her usual efficiency. Marcus from the Times wants a statement. Sarah from Tech Today wants an exclusive interview. And oh, this is interesting. Judge Patricia Morrison wants to speak with you. She was in the ballroom. Judge Morrison? Simone paused in her cleaning. A federal judge. She's asking if you've considered filing an assault charge. Simone looked at the mirror again, at the marks still visible on her skin despite her cleaning efforts. Actually, I hadn't. I'd been focused on the business implications. Well, you should now, said Naomi, a sharpness in her voice that came from formulating a strategy. Because 300 witnesses on the phone means 300 potential pieces of evidence. Graham Wexley just committed an assault in the most heavily documented location possible. Within an hour, Simone was back in her office, a converted warehouse space that real estate agents carefully referred to as a up-and-coming neighborhood, while everyone else simply called it where the rents are affordable. Her team had gathered in the main conference room, driven by the impact of the emergency alerts and social media posts already circulating. "Boss," said Marcus Chen, vice president of operations, opening his laptop to show trending topics on Twitter. "You're third in the national rankings. Cake Attack CEO is 7th. The video has 4 million views." "Which video?" Simone asked, settling into her chair, still wearing her ruined dress since she hadn't had time to change. "All of them." Someone spliced together footage from different angles. "The attack, your reaction, the Wexleys' reaction to the cancellation. This video is everywhere." He played a version of it. The video opened with Graham's face, looking smug and self-righteous, then cut to the moment the cake hit, followed by a close-up of Tilden and Maribel laughing. But the real punch came in the final frames. Simone stood calm and strong, saying, "Back off," while the expression on Graham's face had turned to panic. 93% of the public is on your side, added Communications Director Teresa Liu. "The 7% who oppose you are mostly trolls, and those who think you're too sensitive or can't take a joke. But the overwhelming majority are angry at the Wexleys." Simone's phone rang again. She glanced at the screen and raised her eyebrows. "Senator Williams is calling." She put it on speaker. "Senator." "Dr. Rivers," said the warm voice of Senator Diane Williams, who had built her career advocating for dignity and economic opportunity in the workplace. "I just watched the video. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Senator. I'm angry, but I'm fine." "Good. Because the reason I'm calling is to let you know that several of my colleagues and I are very concerned about what happened tonight. We've had concerns for some time about Wexley Capital Group's labor practices and financial transactions, but their connections are very strong and it's difficult to investigate without cause. What happened to you tonight might be the opportunity we need." Simone sat up straight. "What kind of investigation?" "The kind that examines patterns, how they treat their employees, how they acquire companies, whether their business practices align with the public statements they make about opportunities and growth. Your partnership was going to secure them significant federal contracts through apprenticeship program connections. We want to know if they're qualified for that access." After the meeting ended, Naomi looked at Simone with a mix of admiration and unease. "Do you know what just happened? You didn't just cancel a deal. You potentially triggered a federal investigation. Maybe they should have thought about that before assuming humiliation was entertainment." Simone replied, but she was smiling now. It was the kind of smile that comes from watching consequences come crashing down on people who thought they were untouchable. The office door opened and Sister Patricia Hale walked in. She was striding forward with those determined steps that made her both beloved within the community and feared by anyone who underestimated elderly black women. "Simone, I saw the video. Tell me you're going to file a complaint." "I'm thinking about it." "Think faster," Hale said, settling into a chair with the air of someone planning to stay there until this matter was properly resolved. "That boy attacked you in front of witnesses because he thought his money and last name made him untouchable. Teach young people that they matter, no matter their past. Show them that responsibility is a two-way street." Over the next few hours, Simone's office became the command center for a response that was part legal strategy, part public relations, and part something entirely else. A statement about refusing to accept disrespect as the price of power, dignity, and a statement refusing to accept disrespect as the price of doing business. Attorney Sarah Kaplan arrived with the documents regarding the assault, a straightforward case, multiple witnesses, video evidence, clear intent. Graham Wexley committed an assault in front of 300 people who could testify that this was not an accident, but intentional. Press questions rained down from serious journalists who sensed a bigger story than a canceled deal. Tech industry publications wanted to know about the ethics clause. Business channels wanted to discuss partnership ethics. Civil rights organizations wanted to highlight Simone's response as an example of refusing to accept harassment. And while all this was happening, Simone's phone kept ringing with messages from people she'd never met, other women who'd faced similar treatment in professional settings, people of color who were told to laugh off the disrespect, and other professionals who had swallowed their humiliation because the cost of standing up seemed too high. "You did what we've been hoping to do," one message read. "Thank you for showing that it's possible." As midnight approached, Naomi opened the latest updates. The Wexleys released a statement. Do you want to read it? Simone nodded. The statement was exactly what she'd expected. Regret for causing offense, insistence that it was just a light-hearted joke, perhaps a hint that cultural differences had led to a misunderstanding, and assurances that they respected all partners and valued different perspectives. There's no real apology, Simone said. There's no acknowledgement that the attack wasn't a jolly little joke. There's no acknowledgement that throwing cake in someone's face while your family laughs isn't a cultural misunderstanding. They're trying to brush the incident under the rug through PR, said Naomi. Standard crisis management, express regret, blame a communication breakdown, wait for the news cycle to blow over. But the news cycle isn't passing, said Marcus, scrolling through his feed. It's growing. Dignity not negotiable is trending. People are sharing stories of the humiliation they've experienced at work. And oh, this is great. Investors are asking several companies in the Wexley Capital portfolio whether they approve of their leaders' behavior. Simone stood up and walked toward the window overlooking the neighborhood where her company had taken root. Lights were glowing in the apartment windows. People were living their lives, doing their jobs, raising their children, and dreaming their dreams. These were the communities served by the internship programs, people who had been told they didn't belong in the worlds of technology, finance, or crystal chandeliered rooms. Tonight, instead of telling them that humiliation was the price of opportunity, she had walked away from $700 million. Tonight, she had chosen honor over money. And somehow, even though it seemed impossible, it felt like a victory. Naomi, he said, turning to his team, draft a statement. We're not just canceling the partnership, we're explaining why. We're making it clear, this isn't about sensitivity or overreaction. This was about refusing to do business with people who believe that humiliation is acceptable as long as it targets the right victims. Are you sure? Naomi asked. This will burn bridges. Good, Simone replied. Let them burn. We'll build better ones. As the team got to work, Simone checked her messages one more time. Among the hundreds of messages was one from an unknown number. Dr. Rivers, this is Special Agent Victoria Reese from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. Tonight's incident may be related to an ongoing investigation. Can you meet with us tomorrow? Simone read the message twice, then showed it to Naomi. The FBI, Naomi whispered. Are they already investigating the Wexleys? It seems tonight's performance gave them a reasonable justification they didn't have before, Simone said. How strange that things are turning out this way. She replied to the FBI, then finally took off her ruined dress and put on the clean clothes she kept in the office for long nights. The cake was gone from her face. The humiliation had been documented and turned into a weapon for reckoning. And tomorrow, the real consequences would begin. The Wexleys had thought they could humiliate her for free. They were about to find out exactly how costly that assumption would be. Special Agent Victoria Reese arrived at Rivers Access Technologies at exactly 9 o'clock, accompanied by her partner Agent David Chen. Both conducted themselves with the meticulous professionalism of federal investigators who had learned that high-profile cases required thorough documentation and solid evidence. Simone met them in the conference. Naomi sat down beside her, notebook ready, recording every word for the documentation that would form the foundation of this case. Dr. Rivers, Agent Reese began, placing a tablet on the table between them. Thank you for meeting with us. I want to clarify why we're here. The FBI has been investigating Wexley Capital's business practices for about 8 months. We're focusing on potential securities fraud, labor violations, and financial misconduct. Last night's incident, while personally upsetting, provides us with a reasonable cause we didn't have before. How can the pie thrown in my face constitute a reasonable cause for securities fraud? Simone asked, genuinely curious about the connection. Agent Chen opened the files on his tablet. The attack alone isn't enough. However, your decision to terminate the partnership triggered urgent financial consequences that Wexley Capital was trying to hide from investors. Within 2 hours of your announcement, they sent emails to portfolio companies claiming the deal was proceeding as planned. That's securities fraud, deliberately providing investors with false information about significant business developments. She showed them screenshots of emails dated and time-stamped from the previous night. Messages from Tilden Wexley assured stakeholders that minor glitches were being resolved, that the Rivers Access partnership was proceeding as planned, and that the reported issues had been exaggerated by social media. They lied to investors while the video of the incident went viral, said Simone. This is a bold move, even for someone who believes the rules don't apply to them. It's also subject to criminal prosecution, said Reese, especially when combined with other patterns we've been tracking. Labor violations at the companies they acquired, financial irregularities in how they reported assets, the systematic undervaluation of businesses owned by women and minorities, followed by their purchase below market value. He paused and looked directly into Simone's eyes. Your company was next on that list. The partnership was structured to give them access to your technology, your customer relationships, and your reputation. Then, based on patterns we've observed elsewhere, they would fabricate an excuse to dissolve the partnership while retaining the acquired assets. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. Simone had suspected that the Wexleys valued the company more than her, but hearing federal investigators confirm the systematic asset stripping was different. "How many other companies are there?" Naomi asked, her pen moving swiftly across her notebook. 17 that we've been able to prove, Chen replied. There are another 32 that show a similar pattern of behavior, though the documentation is incomplete. Most of the targets are businesses owned by minorities that the Wexleys publicly championed as diversity initiatives, but privately exploited for their value. Simone felt a rage crystallizing in her chest at the realization that individual acts of cruelty had manifested as systematic exploitation. So Graham throwing cake in my face, that wasn't spontaneous. It was designed to provoke a reaction they could use to justify dissolving the partnership. That way they could keep the assets they'd already seized. That's what we think, Reese confirmed. But you outmaneuvered them by invoking the ethics clause first. Instead of them terminating the agreement for cause and retaining your technology, you terminated it for cause and kept everything, plus you received compensation. Now they have to pay the $50 million in compensation, Naomi added with satisfaction. According to the contract terms, it must be paid within 90 days. Over the next 2 hours, the agents explained the scope of the investigation to Simone. Financial records showing that the Wexleys had inflated asset values for investors while simultaneously claiming poverty to evade taxes. Employee complaints detailing hostile work environments, discriminatory practices, and retaliation against anyone who reported abuse. Email trails proving that Tilden and Maribel were aware of these issues and actively worked to cover them up. "We need your help," Reese finally said. "You have documents related to the partnership negotiations, contracts, emails, meeting notes. These document trails could prove their intent to defraud you just as they've defrauded others." "You have full access to everything," Simone replied without hesitation. "Naomi, please prepare our complete partnership file for the agents." As the FBI agents left with secure drives containing months' worth of documents, Simone's phone rang with a familiar number, Federal Judge Patricia Morrison, who had witnessed the cake attack. "Dr. Rivers, I'm calling you personally," but personally, the judge began. "I wanted you to know that I filed an official complaint regarding the incident I witnessed last night. The Bar Association takes attorneys' conduct seriously, and Tilden Wexley, despite primarily working in finance, is a licensed attorney. Attacking a business partner affects his fitness to practice law." "Thank you, Judge Morrison. This means far more than you might imagine." "There's one more thing," the judge continued. "I've served on the boards of several charitable organizations with Maribel Wexley. After seeing how she reacted to her son's behavior, I'm resigning from all of them and advising others to do the same. Women who applaud their sons for belittling other women don't deserve influential positions in organizations that claim to advance women's opportunities." After the hearing ended, Simone opened social media to see how the story was unfolding. The video had been viewed over 20 million times so far. But more importantly, the conversation had shifted from a spectacle to a call for accountability. Former employees of Wexley Capital portfolio companies were sharing their experiences of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. Other business owners began speaking out about partnership discussions that felt designed to strip them of their equity. Investors were asking the public whether their money was being managed ethically. Marcus appeared at the door. "Boss, you need to see this. Graham Wexley just posted an apology video." They gathered around Marcus's laptop and watched Graham. Graham was dressed in casual clothes, clearly designed to make him look sincere and remorseful, and was speaking directly to the camera. "I sincerely apologize for my behavior at the gala," he said, adjusting his facial expression to convey remorse. "It was meant as a joke, but I now realize it was hurtful and inappropriate. I'm truly sorry for the trouble I caused, Dr. Rivers. I'm young and still learning. I hope she can forgive my poor judgment." "Young and still learning," Simone repeated without changing her tone. "He's 20, not 12. Wait. There's more," Marcus said, scrolling through the comments. The video had gone viral. There were more critical comments than likes, and people were dissecting every element of those words that couldn't be called an apology. "The attack I made instead of any trouble. Intentional humiliation instead of a mistake in judgment. I understand why this was wrong instead of I hope he can forgive me." And beneath all of this, a pinned comment from the Wexley Capital Public Relations team. "Graham is stepping back from the public eye to reflect and mature. The family is requesting privacy during this difficult time." "Difficult time," Naomi said with dark humor. "His difficult time is being held responsible for an attack while under FBI investigation. My heart is bleeding." Simone's office phone rang. It was Teresa from Communications. "Dr. Rivers, there are interview requests from 63 media outlets. How would you like to handle this?" "Schedule a press conference," Simone decided. "Tomorrow afternoon. Instead of giving individual interviews, we'll make a single comprehensive statement, and Teresa, invite community members." The people our internship programs serve. This isn't just a corporate drama. The issue is what kind of behavior we've normalized in professional settings. That evening, Sister Hale organized a community gathering at the church, the same church where Simone had launched her first apprenticeship program 12 years earlier. The church was packed. People were crammed into pews designed for smaller crowds. They had been moved by the video they'd seen and wanted to understand what had happened to the woman who had brought opportunities to their neighborhood. Some of you know Dr. Rivers from her work here, Hale said from the podium, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had served communities forgotten by the powerful for decades. Some of you know her because she's involved in your children's programs. You all know her because while other companies were fleeing to brighter neighborhoods, she chose to invest here. Hale gestured to Simone. Simone stood up and walked forward. Having come straight from the office, she was still wearing the business attire she'd worn at the FBI meeting. I want to talk about Onwar, Simone began, looking out at the faces ranging from the young people in the apprenticeship programs to the elderly residents who had watched the neighborhood change over the decades. Last night, a 20-year-old man threw cake in my face because he thought it was presumptuous of me to be at a formal gala. His family laughed because they agreed. 300 people witnessed it, and most of them laughed too. She paused for a moment to let the impact of that reality sink in. Rather than accept the premise that humiliation is something I must endure as the cost of doing business, I walked away from $700 million. Some think this was a rash move. Some think I overreacted. Others just laugh it off and think I should have taken the money. A young woman in the third row hesitantly raised her hand. Simone recognized her. Kaisha Martinez, one of her newest interns. Dr. Rivers, what do you say to those who think you're too sensitive? People call you too sensitive when they want you to accept mistreatment without complaining, Simone replied. I tell them that can't take a joke is what they say when they want to keep belittling you without consequence. I tell them you must never compromise your dignity for professional success. Another hand went up. Marcus Washington, one of the first graduates and currently working at a major tech firm. What about the jobs the partnership would create? People say you're costing us opportunities. It was a fair question, and Simone appreciated his courage to ask it openly. The partnership would create about 300 jobs within 5 years, but that would require partnering with people who believe it's acceptable as long as the humiliation targets the right victims. While teaching you that honor matters, I couldn't show that mine was negotiable. She pulled out her phone and showed them something she'd been working on all afternoon. Instead, we're launching a new partnership consortium. Local businesses, ethical investors, and community organizations. It will create 400 jobs within the same time frame, not with partners who see us as a charity or a diversity initiative, but with partners who appreciate the value we bring to the table. The room erupted in applause. The sound enveloped Simone like a wave, confirming that her decision was the right one, no matter the cost. After the meeting, Simone stood outside the church with Father Hale and watched as families dispersed into the evening darkness. The neighborhood looked different from when she'd first started. Cleaner streets, more businesses, the traces of investments catalyzed by her company's presence. Do you know what scares people like Wexley? Hale said quietly. It's not your success. It's not your money. It's your refusal to accept that their approval matters more than your own self-respect. They can't control people who don't play a role for their own comfort. When she returned to her apartment, a modest place she'd held onto, because leaving the neighborhood that had supported her at the start of her move felt like abandoning it, even though she could have afforded a much nicer place, Simone finally began to process the full weight of the past 24 hours. There were hundreds of unread messages on her phone. Most were supportive, some critical, all containing opinions on decisions only she could make. As she scrolled through the messages, she paused at one from an unknown number. Dr. Rivers, my name is Angela Chen. I used to work at Wexley Capital. I was fired 3 years ago for reporting Graham Wexley's sexual harassment. I signed a confidentiality agreement, but seeing your courage makes me want to break mine. Can we talk? Simone forwarded the message to Agent Reese, then replied, I'm here. You're not alone. Within an hour, 17 more messages arrived from former Wexley employees. Each described the abuse and offered to breach their non-disclosure agreements if necessary to stop this cycle. The dam was breaking. The silence was ending, and the Wexley family was about to discover that humiliating one woman had given hundreds of others the courage to speak out. At midnight, Naomi sent a message. Wexley Capital shares dropped 23% today. 3 major investors are pulling out. The board is calling an emergency meeting. Simone read the message twice, then replied, Good. Let them feel what it's like to have the ground slip out from under their feet. She turned off her phone and went to bed. She knew tomorrow would bring a press conference, more FBI questioning, more public scrutiny. But But tonight she allowed herself to feel something that had been missing in the ballroom when the cake was thrown in her face. Power, not the kind that comes from money, connections, or a family name. The kind that comes from refusing to break, from relying on evidence rather than performance, from choosing dignity over money, and from discovering that this choice itself is a victory. The Wexleys had thought they could humiliate her without consequence. They were learning just how wrong they were. And tomorrow, the fallout would accelerate from financial pressure to criminal investigation, from social judgment to legal liability, from private shame to public reckoning, because Dr. Simone Rivers had spent 30 years building something the Wexleys would never understand, a power that didn't require their permission, a success that wasn't dependent on their approval, and a dignity that couldn't be taken away by a pie thrown in her face. The attack was meant to diminish her. Instead, it had exposed them, and this exposure had begun to lead to the loss of everything they thought was untouchable. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Rivers Access Technologies headquarters, but journalists began arriving around noon, and Simone had deliberately chosen instead of more prestigious venues, setting up their cameras and testing their microphones. The exposed brick walls and visible support beams sent a message. We've built something real here, something that doesn't need marble columns or crystal chandeliers to prove its worth. Simone stood at the window of her second-floor office, watching the news vehicles. Beside her, Naomi was reviewing her speaking notes with the focused intensity of someone who knew every word would be analyzed, quoted, and weaponized by those who set the agenda. The Wexleys' legal team sent another settlement offer this morning, Naomi said, lifting her phone. If you sign the confidentiality agreement regarding the incident, they're prepared to pay the full $50 million in compensation immediately. They want to buy my silence, Simone translated. What did you tell them? You don't negotiate with the people who attacked you, and federal investigators might have something to say about influencing witnesses through financial inducements, she said. With a knock at the door, Communications Director Teresa arrived to provide the latest updates. There are 73 media outlets accredited for the conference, national networks, business press, tech publications, and, interestingly, 3 civil rights organizations that want to frame this as a story of workplace integrity. How many people are from the community? Simone asked. 47 people have been approved, including 12 current interns, 8 program alumni, and Reverend Hale along with a delegation from his church. They're taking their seats in the front rows. That was exactly what Simone had. This wasn't just about corporate drama or the misbehavior of the wealthy. It was about communities watching what happens to people like them when they succeed, and whether that success requires enduring humiliation. At 1:50 p.m., Simone went down to the main floor, where her team had transformed the open workspace into a press room. Cameras were lined up against the back wall. Reporters filled the rows of chairs. Community members had taken over the front section. Their presence served as a silent statement about whose voice mattered in this story. At exactly 2 p.m., she stepped to the podium. She wore a navy suit that exuded understated authority, her hair pulled back in a professional style without apologizing for its natural texture. Good afternoon, she began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the room. Thank you for coming. 3 days ago, at a gala held to celebrate a $700 million partnership, a 20-year-old man named Graham Wexley threw a cake in my face while his parents smiled and 300 witnesses watched. I want to explain what happened, why it matters, and what comes next. He paused for a moment, allowing the cameras to capture his expression, calm, resolute, showing no intention of appearing either victimized or angry. Some have called it a joke gone wrong, a moment of poor judgment, a youthful mistake. I want to make this clear, it was an attack. It was deliberate, carried out in front of witnesses, for an audience expected to find my humiliation entertaining. As Graham Wexley approached me, he said, to understand where he belongs in our world. The message was clear. My presence at that gala was an act of audacity. My dignity was negotiable, and humiliating me was acceptable entertainment. A reporter's hand went up, but Simone ignored him and continued. I immediately withdrew Rivers Access Technologies from the partnership. Our legal team specifically insisted on including an ethics clause because we partner with organizations whose values align with ours. Dignity, respect, and equal opportunity are not up for negotiation. These are the cornerstones. She gestured to the community members in the front rows. These are the people our apprenticeship programs serve. Young people from neighborhoods that tech companies typically overlook, employees said to lack the right background or the right connections. We teach them that their talents matter more than their zip codes, that their work speaks louder than assumptions about who they are. I couldn't teach them that while partnering with people who believe humiliation is acceptable as long as it targets the right victims. He noticed those raising their hands. Does anyone have a question? A business network reporter stood up. Dr. Rivers, critics say you overreacted, that by walking away from a profitable partnership out of hurt feelings, you cost your company and your community hundreds of jobs. How do you respond to that? Simone looked him straight in the eye. I'd ask those critics if they were told to know their place by having food thrown in their faces at an official event. I'd ask if they believe one must sacrifice dignity for professional success. And I'd tell them that we've formed a new partnership consortium with partners who see us as equals, not as a charity case, that will create 400 jobs over the next 5 years. Another reporter: have you filed a criminal complaint against Graham Wexley? I met with the district attorney's office this morning. Charges for assault will be filed today. Numerous witnesses, video footage taken from various angles, and Graham's own words make his intent clear. This was not an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attack. A third reporter stood up. The Wexley family have issued a statement expressing their disappointment, claiming you cannot separate business from personal feelings. They argue that the partnership would benefit communities unable to fully access services, and that your pride is hindering progress. Simone smiled slightly. The Wexley family is currently under FBI investigation for securities fraud, labor violations, and the federal investigators believe my company has been targeted for the divestment of assets under the guise of a partnership. Therefore, when they speak of benefiting communities deprived of services, I invite everyone to look not at press releases, but at their actual past performance. The room buzzed with follow-up questions, but Simone raised her hand for silence. There's one more thing you should know. After the attack video went viral, 17 former Wexley Capital employees reached out to me. Each one spoke of a culture of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation in the workplace. Each one was forced to sign non-disclosure agreements to receive compensation after reporting the abuse. All 17 are currently working with federal investigators and labor law attorneys to void these non-disclosure agreements and share their experiences. She paused for a moment to let the information sink in. Graham Wexley throwing cake in my face was not an isolated incident. It was a blatant display of behavior that has been tolerated, encouraged, and protected within Wexley organizations for years. The only difference was that this time the incident took place in front of cameras, and the victim had the means to retaliate. Teresa approached the podium and whispered that Simone had received a call requiring an immediate response. Simone excused herself for a moment and stepped into the adjacent room. Naomi handed her the phone. "Rivers, this is District Attorney Michael Foster. I wanted to inform you personally that we will be filing assault charges against Graham Wexley within the hour. But there's more. The FBI has just executed search warrants at Wexley Capital's headquarters and 3 branch offices. They've seized computers, financial records, and communication logs. This is now a full-scale federal criminal investigation." After the call, Simone returned to the podium with new information that would dominate the next news cycle. "We've just been informed that federal search warrants are currently being executed at Wexley Capital. The investigation I mentioned earlier has been expanded based on evidence provided by former employees and business partners. This is no longer just a matter of a pie being thrown in my face. This is a matter of systematic fraud, labor violations, and exploitation carried out behind the facade of philanthropy and diversity initiatives." The press conference lasted another hour. Journalists asked questions about new partnerships, the future of the apprenticeship program, and Simone's advice for other professionals facing similar treatment. Throughout the entire process, she maintained that same calm authority, refusing to display anger or play the victim. She simply stated the facts and stood by her truth. As the crowd dispersed, Keisha Martinez, the young intern who had asked a question at the church meeting, approached hesitantly. "Dr. Rivers, can I ask you something?" "Of course. My mom wants to know what happens if they come after you. I mean legally or financially or whatever. She's worried they'll try to destroy you for standing up to them." Simone, sensing the fear behind the question, thought seriously. "Here's what I've learned, Keisha. People like Wexley rely on fear to maintain their power. They assume you'll stay silent because they think resisting will be too costly, too risky, and that there's a high chance they'll destroy everything you've built. But the thing is, I've spent 30 years building something real. Patents that prove innovation, relationships that prove value, results that prove competence. They can't take these away from me through lawsuits, smear campaigns, or financial pressure." He placed his hand on Keisha's shoulder. "The only thing they can do is scare me, and I refuse to give them that power. Because the moment I let fear silence me, I'll be teaching you that success requires accepting disrespect. I won't do that." By evening, the story had turned from a viral video into a full-blown scandal. News channels were conducting in-depth investigations into Wexley Capital's business practices. Former employees were giving interviews on camera describing harassment and discrimination. Investors were publicly demanding answers regarding the financial irregularities indicated by the FBI's search warrants. And in a development that even surprised Simone, 3 members of Wexley Capital's board of directors resigned, citing fundamental differences regarding values and ethics with the family leadership. Marcus opened the financial news. Wexley Capital shares have lost 41% of their value since the gala. 3 major investors have completely pulled out, And oh, this is interesting. The Wexley Foundation just lost its nonprofit status. The IRS is investigating whether they used charitable donations for personal gain. Events were unfolding rapidly. What began with one woman's refusal to accept humiliation had exposed systematic corruption, now documented by federal investigators through subpoenas and search warrants. That night, Simone received a call from Angela Chen, a former Wexley employee who had been fired for reporting sexual harassment. "Dr. Rivers, I just gave a statement to FBI agents. I told them everything Graham did, everything HR turned a blind eye to, everything his family knew and covered up. They said my testimony aligns with what the other 6 women reported. We're not alone anymore." "No," Simone agreed. "You're not alone. And you should never have been alone." The next morning, news came that Graham Wexley had been arrested on assault charges. In the mugshot, there was a young man who looked far less confident than the person who had thrown the cake 3 days earlier. While the bail amount wasn't an insurmountable figure for his family, it was a sign of the seriousness of the charges. More importantly, the district attorney revealed that the assault charge wasn't the only one. The assault, "We are examining evidence of a possible conspiracy to commit fraud, as there are indications it may have been planned to provoke the termination of a contract that would financially benefit the Wexley family." Later that afternoon, Tilden and Maribel Wexley appeared at a hastily arranged press conference. They looked far more disheveled than during their usual public appearances. Tilden's statement was brief and defensive. "The charges against our son are baseless and will be proven so in court. The investigation into our business practices is a witch hunt motivated by professional jealousy and racial animus. We have worked for decades to create opportunities for disadvantaged communities, and we will not be intimidated by the baseless accusations of those who profit from playing the victim." The racial animus remark caused a sensation. Within a few hours, civil rights organizations began demanding an apology. Former partners issued statements declaring they were distancing themselves from the Wexleys, and several prominent attorneys began offering pro bono services to former employees working to breach their confidentiality agreements. Senator Williams called Simone directly. "Dr. Rivers, tomorrow I will introduce a bill to invalidate non-disclosure agreements in cases involving harassment, discrimination, or assault in the workplace. I've named it the Rivers Honor Act. I hope you'll testify in support of it." "I'd be honored, Senator." As the week progressed, the walls closing in on the Wexley empire continued to tighten. Federal investigators expanded their probe to include tax fraud and money laundering. Labor lawyers filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of 43 former employees. Major clients terminated their contracts, citing concerns over reputation and a clash of values. It was revealed that the Wexley Foundation, the family's primary vehicle for positive publicity through philanthropy, had spent 68% of its donations on administrative expenses, with a significant portion of that transferred to Wexley family members as consulting fees. Even the country club where the gala was held issued a statement. "Grand Meridian does not condone the attack that occurred at our facilities. We are in full cooperation with law enforcement and have implemented new protocols to prevent similar incidents." Throughout this entire process, Simone remained focused on what mattered: establishing the new partnership consortium, expanding apprenticeship programs, and supporting former Wexley employees who found the courage to speak out. She gave interviews when they served strategic goals, declined them when she felt they were exploitative, and refused to let this drama distract her from the mission that had been her source of motivation for 30 years. Pastor Hale dropped by the office one afternoon with food he'd brought from the church's community kitchen. "You're not eating enough," he said, setting the bowls which smelled like home on the table. "You're so busy trying to change the world that you're not taking care of yourself." "I'm fine, Pastor. You're acting out of anger and a sense of justice," Hale corrected. "That works for a while, but eventually you need to rest. Justice is a marathon, not a sprint." Simone, realizing the truth in the old man's words, accepted both the meal and this wisdom. "The FBI says their investigations could take months. Graham's trial on assault charges won't happen for at least a year. How can I maintain this momentum without burning myself out?" "Remember why you started," Hale said simply. "Not to destroy the Wexleys. That's just a consequence. You started this because the kids in this neighborhood deserve a chance no matter their past. Whether the wealthy pay for their crimes or not, this work continues." That evening, after everyone had gone home, Simone sat in her office, staring at the wall where photos from the apprenticeship graduations hung. Hundreds of faces, young people who were told they didn't belong in tech, yet proved everyone wrong through their talent, determination, and support. That was the real work, not press conferences or FBI investigations or watching the Wexley empire crumble. The work was creating opportunities, opening paths, proving that dignity and success aren't mutually exclusive. Her phone vibrated with a news alert. Wexley Capital files for bankruptcy protection. Investors alleged fraud. Simone read the news once, then set the phone aside. The empire was crumbling. Justice was being served. and tomorrow she would return to what truly mattered, teaching young people that they belong in spaces designed to exclude them, that their dignity is non-negotiable, and that success never requires sacrificing self-respect. Graham Wexley had thrown cake in her face, thinking it would humiliate her. Instead, that incident had revealed his true face, shattered the image his family had carefully constructed, and allowed the truth to be spoken by the many voices that had remained silent. That was the real victory. Not revenge, but exposure. Not to destroy them, but to refuse to let them destroy him. And that refusal had changed everything. 6 months after the cake was thrown in her face at the Grand Meridian Ballroom, Dr. Simone Rivers sat in a federal courtroom, watching Graham Wexley learn what it meant to be held accountable when privilege couldn't buy immunity. The trial had lasted 3 weeks, but after the prosecutors presented their evidence, there was little doubt about the outcome. Videos of the attack shot from 17 different angles. An audio recording of Graham's words about teaching her where she belonged. Witness testimonies describing the deliberate nature of the attack, the subsequent parental approval, and the calculated act of humiliation carried out in front of an audience. However, the prosecution went even further by linking the attack to a broader conspiracy. They proved that Graham's attack was designed precisely to provoke the reaction he sought, Simone's termination of the partnership on moral grounds. Internal emails from Wexley Capital revealed that the company had planned to use Simone's overreaction as a pretext to retain the technology and customer relationships it had already shared during the pre-merger integration. In his closing argument, the prosecutor called this an attack as a business strategy, a deliberate act of humiliation designed to create a grounds for contract termination that would destroy Dr. Rivers' reputation and company while providing financial benefit to the Wexley family. Now, the same federal judge, Patricia Morrison, who had witnessed the attack and filed a complaint with the bar against Tilden, was preparing to announce the sentence. The courtroom was packed. The back rows were filled with media members. Former Wexley employees had filled the gallery. Congregants from Reverend Hale's church were seated alongside Rivers Access interns. Their presence sent a message about whose voice mattered at that moment. Graham stood before the judge among expensive lawyers who had done their best but couldn't overcome the video evidence and witness testimonies. He looked smaller, younger, and more uncertain than he had at the gala. The sly smile was gone. His defiant stance had been replaced by a feeling born of realizing for the first time that his actions were driven by fear or their consequences. Judge Morrison reviewed the sentencing guidelines with the methodical precision of someone creating a record that would stand up on appeal. Mr. Wexley, you have been convicted of assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and witness tampering through financial inducement. The evidence shows this was not a youthful mistake or a bad decision. This was a calculated attack designed to discredit Dr. Rivers and create a pretext for business practices that federal investigators have systematically proven to be fraudulent. The judge paused for a moment to let the assessment sink in. In your statement of impact on the victim, it is noted that you spent years building a company that created opportunities for communities unable to fully benefit from services. Your attack aimed to destroy this work while enriching your family. The court considers this a particularly grave offense given your family's public statements supporting diversity and opportunity. Graham's attorney made a final plea for leniency, citing his client's age and lack of a criminal record. Judge Morrison's stance remained unchanged. Mr. Wexley, you are 20 years old. You are old enough to understand that the attack was wrong. You are old enough to know that intentional humiliation causes harm. You are old enough to face the adult consequences of adult crimes. He glanced at his notes. The court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Additionally, you are ordered to pay Dr. Rivers $50,000 in compensation for emotional distress, and you are permanently barred from holding any executive or board member positions in any publicly traded company. Waves of shock rippled through the courtroom. 18 months wasn't the maximum sentence Graham could have received, but it was actual prison time, not probation, not house arrest, and not the type of suspended sentence wealthy defendants often negotiate. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, your family, Tilden and Maribel Wexley, will be sentenced next week on the related conspiracy charges. But I want to be clear on one point, Mr. Wexley. Your attack on Dr. Rivers exposed the systematic corruption that federal investigators have now documented across 17 companies and 43 victims. Your act, intended to humiliate a woman, instead exposed a fraud that had been operating with impunity for years. You thought you were making a show of power, instead you exposed the guilt. The police officers leading Graham away felt something release in Simone's chest, not exactly victory, but a sense of vindication. The system that had let down so many people like her had, this time, ensured accountability. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Simone. Naomi stepped in to block them as the cameras captured the moment. Dr. Rivers, what are your thoughts on the sentence? Justice has been served, Simone replied briefly. Not just for me, but for the 17 former Wexley employees who spoke out about the harassment they endured. For the 43 workers exploited through fraudulent labor practices. For everyone told that their dignity was up for sale if the price was right. Another reporter. What's next for Axis Technologies, Dr. Rivers? We're growing. The new partnership consortium has secured funding for 800 jobs over the next 5 years. That's twice the number of jobs the Wexley partnership would create. We're proving that profitable growth and ethical business practices aren't mutually exclusive. A week later, Tilden and Maribel Wexley appeared before the same judge to face their own sentences for conspiracy, securities fraud, and labor violations. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Emails instructing subordinates to exploit businesses owned by minorities, financial records proving systematic asset stripping, and employee testimonies describing retaliation for reporting harassment. Tilden received a 4-year federal prison sentence. Maribel received a 2-year prison sentence and 3 years of probation. Both were ordered to pay $14 million in restitution to the victims of their fraudulent business practices. "You built an empire on exploitation," said Judge Morrison. In his voice was the weight of judicial authority finally being applied to those who believed their wealth made them untouchable. "You portrayed yourselves as philanthropists supporting communities deprived of services, while systematically plundering businesses owned by minorities. You laughed when your son attacked a business partner because you believed it was acceptable as long as it targeted the right victims of humiliation. This court has determined that your beliefs are misguided, your actions are criminal, and your accountability is long overdue." As she was led away, Simone thought of the gala 6 months earlier, Tilden's fleeting handshake, Maribel mistaking her for catering staff, the laughter when Graham threw the cake. They had seen Simone as someone not worth their attention, insignificant, too weak to threaten the world they had so carefully built. They were all wrong. The Wexley Foundation was permanently dissolved, and its remaining assets were distributed to genuine charitable organizations serving the public rather than enriching board members. Wexley Capital declared bankruptcy, and the companies in its portfolio were sold to investors not under federal investigation. The family's vacation properties, luxury vehicles, and personal assets were seized to pay compensation to the victims. But perhaps most importantly, the Rivers Honor Act passed the Senate with bipartisan support. Non-disclosure agreements could no longer be used to silence victims of workplace harassment, discrimination, or assault. 43 former Wexley employees who had been forced to remain silent saw that their voices were now legally protected. Senator Williams invited Simone to the signing ceremony. "Dr. Rivers, your refusal to accept humiliation has changed the way we think about dignity in the workplace. This law will protect countless people who have suffered in silence because powerful employers forced them to choose between justice and survival." 3 months after the ruling, Rivers Axis Technologies held a celebration at Reverend Hale's church, the very same place where Simone had launched the first apprenticeship program 14 years earlier. But this gathering was larger, louder, and more joyful. 800 people filled the church and spilled into the fellowship hall. Current apprentices, program alumni, community members, and partners from the new consortium. "We have gathered here to celebrate something greater than the success of a single company," Simone began, addressing the crowd from the very pulpit where Hale had preached countless times about honor and justice. "We are celebrating the principle that success never requires compromising self-respect, that honor is not up for negotiation, that responsibility applies to everyone regardless of wealth, connections, or last name." She gestured toward the interns sitting in the front rows. Their faces bore the traces of every kind of background the tech industry usually overlooks. "When Graham Wexley threw cake in my face, he thought he was putting me in my place. But he taught you all something far more important, that resistance is possible, that systems can deliver justice, and that refusing to accept disrespect isn't an overreaction, it's self-preservation." Keisha Martinez stood up. Despite her obvious tension, her voice rang out loud. "Dr. Rivers, my mother asked me to tell you something. She said watching you turn down $700 million and walk away taught her that she didn't have to accept disrespect at work. She filed a harassment complaint against her boss. The man was fired yesterday. My mother says you gave her permission to believe that her dignity matters." The room erupted in applause. People stood up, seeing their own stories reflected in Keisha's mother's courage. How many had accepted mistreatment because the cost of standing up seemed too high? How many had endured humiliation because powerful people implied they were too sensitive? Simone's eyes welled up, and she didn't fight it. This is the true victory. Not Graham going to prison, or the Wexleys going bankrupt. Victory is every person who sees what's happening and decides their own dignity matters. It's the person who refuses to accept the premise that success requires enduring humiliation. It's the person who resists, no matter the cost, because some things are more valuable than money. Pastor Hale stepped up to the microphone. His presence drew attention without him even asking for it. "I've known Simone since she was a student with big dreams, possessing nothing but her intelligence and determination. While other companies fled to wealthier neighborhoods, I watched her build something real in this community. And I watched her refuse to turn a blind eye to the oppression of the wealthy." He turned to address Simone directly. You could have taken the money and swallowed the disrespect. Most people would have done that. Most people do that every day, because resisting seems impossible. But you showed them it isn't impossible. The cost is high, yes. It's hard, of course, but it isn't impossible. The celebration lasted for hours. Dinner, music, and stories shared about journeys from apprenticeship to careers that once seemed out of reach. Graduates shared how they'd landed jobs at major tech companies, started their own businesses, and created opportunities for the next generation. Every story was proof that Simone's refusal to accept humiliation had protected something greater than a single partnership. As evening fell and families began to leave, Simone found herself outside the church with Naomi. She was watching the neighborhood that had supported her from the very beginning. Streetlights illuminated familiar corners. People were walking home from work. Children were playing in parks that were cleaner and safer than they had been 14 years earlier. $700 million, Naomi said quietly. Do you still think giving it up was worth it? Simone looked at the community, the one that had stood by her when she needed support, spoken up when others remained silent, and celebrated her victory as if it were their own, and considered the question seriously. The partnership would have created 300 jobs and required us to partner with people who think humiliation is acceptable entertainment, she replied. Instead, the consortium we formed will create 800 jobs with partners who see us as equals. The Rivers Honor Act will protect countless workers from being forced into silence. 43 former Wexley employees have been compensated. Graham, Tilden, and Maribel learned that wealth cannot buy immunity from the consequences. He turned to Naomi with a faint smile. So yes, getting away from people who throw cake in my face was definitely worth it. Her phone vibrated with a message from Angela Chen, a former Wexley employee whose courage to breach the non-disclosure agreement had inspired 16 others to do the same. Dr. Rivers, I started a new job today. For the first time in 3 years, I feel safe at a workplace. Thank you for showing that resistance is possible. That was the true measure of victory, not money, fame, or revenge, but the ripple effect created by refusing to accept that some people's dignity is less important than others' comfort. As Simone drove home through familiar streets, she thought about the gala 6 months earlier. Crystal chandeliers and designer gowns. The assumption that she was part of the catering staff, not a partner. Graham's smirk as he approached her with the cake to humiliate her. Her family's laughter. 300 witnesses watching her humiliation as entertainment. She thought of standing there with cream dripping down her face, having made a decision that would cost $700 million but protect something far more valuable, the principle that honor is not negotiable, that success is never without self-respect, and that accountability applies to everyone. The Wexleys had thought that the cake thrown in her face would teach her to accept her place in their world. Instead, this incident showed the world that their positions built on exploitation and protected by wealth were no longer secure. Graham was in federal prison about to learn the consequences of the attack. Tilden and Maribel were in federal prison about to learn that systematic fraud would eventually be held accountable. Wexley Capital had gone bankrupt. Its assets had been distributed to the victims rather than enriching the perpetrators. And Dr. Simone Rivers was exactly where she always was, creating opportunities for communities ignored by the powerful, teaching young people that their dignity matters, proving that refusing to accept disrespect is not an overreaction, but self-preservation. 6 months ago, a 20-year-old man had thrown a pie in her face, and his family had cheered. Today they were all in prison, and she was free. She was free from partnerships that required her to endure humiliation. She was free from the burden of wondering whether she should stay silent. She was free to build something better with partners who valued dignity as much as profit. The fight had come at a high cost, giving up $700 million, enduring the public spotlight, watching people debate, testifying in hearings that forced her to relive the humiliation time and again. But standing in her neighborhood, looking at the company she founded, the community she served, and the law bearing her name that protects workers nationwide, Simone was absolutely certain she had made the right choice, because dignity was not up for negotiation. Success never required sacrificing self-respect, and accountability, no matter how long it took, eventually came for everyone, even for those who believed their wealth made them untouchable. Graham Wexley had tried to teach her a lesson about knowing her place. Instead, Dr. Simone Rivers had taught the world a lesson about the price of assuming that power, dignity, and the humiliation of some people were acceptable forms of entertainment. This lesson would continue to resonate long after the Wexleys were released from prison. It would resonate in every workplace that refused to tolerate harassment. It would resonate in every boardroom where dignity was valued alongside profit. It would resonate in every community where opportunities were created, not merely promised. The cake had been made to humiliate him. Instead, it had exposed them, and that exposure had changed everything.